G'day, friends and fans. Welcome to Dave Talk Stuff. War has a hidden cost, and a lot of people seem to not be aware of this, and so they go in eyes wide shut. But the shocking truth about men in war is the psychological toll, is often the greatest number of, shall we say, wounded. Right, the greatest casualties of war are the hidden wounded. The civilians pay the highest price. The shock, the trauma, the damage. They are targeted. They are sometimes abandoned as governments scramble to protect themselves. Air defences are put up around government buildings. Often when cities are defended, the government's heavy hand pushes you to the side. And of course, war crimes, moral dilemmas, fight for survival, and questions of faith arise. Often profound and hidden impacts of war hit men the hardest, because men are forced to fight. Women are allowed to flee. You're forced to protect them even when they turn against you. Now, there are several books on the subject of war, and those who suffer the psychological effects of war. It's up to you to seek help. This is merely a look at war so that people can understand and make a better informed choice about war. Because, believe it or not, through most people's lifetimes, there's been at least one war, and eventually they catch you, your father, or your brother, or your son. They aim to please only themselves. And until things change, right, we have to be aware and understand. No, I'm not saying to be pro or against war. I am just arming you with the facts. And the facts is the first casualty of war is the truth. They're going to hit you with propaganda. War pro posters. They will use shaming tactics. They will use Call of Duty, right? It's your service, right? Camaraderie, right? They don't just don't go for men either. They go for women. But camaraderie is often one where they promise you to or venture, right? Yeehaw, come and help. Camaraderie is another one. Yeah, shaming tactics, fall in line, conformity, making you feel important, making you feel needed. And it's the same with every war, right? We need every war, right? Men, women, right? But portrayals, duty, honor, friendship, it's probably one of the most famous and most effective recruitment posts, of course, is just merely make men wanted, right? And particularly leading up to World War II, there were so many single unwanted men out of work. It is so easy for governments to hoover up the unemployed. And that's why they do it. If you keep seeing unemployment rise, you know your government's planning for war, right? As the economy loses value, they're doing that to make war cheaper, to fight a war longer. Shocking truth is, right, first wounds are psychological traumas, right? Shell shock. The sounds of war are so intense, the fear and anxiety become such a profound impact that it changes your biochemistry, right? Your survival instinct, it never goes away. It just lessens, right? That's why you hear about people triggered by helicopters or loud noises. That's psychological trauma, or aka shell shock. Of course, there are many who suffer in silence because they're facing moral dilemmas, right? They can't reconcile they think the war is unjust. They either, why did I survive? Why, you know, they've got to deal with the atrocities they witnessed or took part in. There are many instances, shocking instances, where there was a alleged war crime and the code of silence kicks in and the war crimes become routine, right? People believing that this code of silence will protect them, and suddenly a toxic cohesion where you could line up, men straight to their face and tell them they've done wrong, and they won't believe it, right? Once the morality, the trust and bonds become so strong, right, and those who abuse power will whether it's Breaker Morant or the slaughter of unarmed Germans in the during the first 6 days of D-Day. They tried to surrender. They were cut up, but they were just gunned down. There was all the most of them were kids, just forced for conscripts, right? The 100,000 French who died in the shellings between the two sides. Uh, War crimes amassed on such a grand scale because of the code of silence. Nobody refused illegal orders. No, this whole mythology around illegal orders, maybe in modern era, but throughout war there has been war crimes, and the silent victims are the people who suffer the having witnessed these crimes. Then comes disillusionment, right? The soldiers, they fight a war, the population's turned against them, the propaganda of their own media is against you, they accuse you of things you haven't done, right? They accuse you of being an imperialist, a rapist, a resource thief, and even today, the lies persist, right? The left persist in their lies because the only thing, they don't care about truth, they don't care about power. So men betray men for power, and that is goes from moral dilemma to disillusionment, particularly when they see the corrupt rise to the top, the stripping of your identity, the stripping of your rights. You can be disabled, and abandoned by comrades because you're a liability. Your demobilization. You can be left waiting for months before flowing out. You can spend months or years in and out of hospital, and you're nothing but a number, right? You have no purpose, so you're often overlooked. Uh, there's always someone with a higher priority than you. So, and of course, propaganda takes its toll because soldiers see the truth, but the government and their enemies manipulate the public, right? So the public, there's a disconnect between the public and the actualities on the battlefield. Now, the psychological traumas often are post-traumatic stress disorder, complex stress disorders, that is, when you go from being when you suffer intrusive memories, or what they call flashbacks, nightmares, where you're in a state of hypervigilance and emotionally numb, you can actually get worse, believe it or not, and have difficulties with anger, difficulties with negative thoughts, and of course problems with interpersonal relationships, because you treat your friends, your family, the closer they are to you, the more likely you are to try to save them, keep them safe, make them follow orders, and sometimes acting out in order to protect them, from imaginary threats, being hypervigilant. And of course, these hypervigilance can sometimes be passed on for generations, where you imagine every man's a rapist, or there's a terrorist behind every tree, or everybody with a beard is hiding something. And of course, as you get older, you get more depressed, more anxious, and anxiety leads to depression. Depression leads to anxiety, and these conditions persist for generations. Just doesn't affect you. You pass on your disorders, right? Children see your behavior, think it's normal. They become hypervigilant. They start imagining enemies. They start assessing everybody as a threat. Now, recently, more and more war propaganda is surfacing about World War III. People, of course, when they don't know the truth, they speculate. That's how we get speculative fiction, right? We have a lot of speculative fiction right now about World War III, a lot of propaganda claiming Trump, Putin, uh, Netanyahu, you name it, Keir Starmer even, every world leader, they're acting out. Okay, they're trying to bluff and get others to back down, right? Because the first to blink is the first to lose, right? Lose popular support. Keir Starmer, of course, doesn't want to face elections, right? He's panicking. Generally, there are survival guides now floating around preparing for war, particularly in Europe. They're mostly pushing propaganda about Russian invasion. Russia's now, the Ukraine war is the slowest war since the Battle of Somme, right? The slowest battle, right? Russia's not crossing the Ukrainian frontier, but Finland and Denmark, even Germany, France, they're all pushing their own. France claims that they're going to recruit soldiers. Now, this has been bounced around before. The last big recruitment in France, November, was a flop. Right, people didn't want to go. They said, "Hell no, we're not going to fight for Ukraine." And since then, everybody has been trying to amass an army. That's a bad. That's a bad sign when governments start amassing armies. Instead of winding down Ukraine, they're pouring more men and machines into Ukraine. And now that bills are stacking up, resources aren't going paid for. We've seen a gold price crash in 2 days. Things are really heating up, and it's all because people are panicking, traumatized. They're acting out their fears and paranoia, right? They think, oh, the world's coming to an end, or World War III is going to start, so they panic buy. Gold producers dumping gold on the market because they need cash. They don't, because during wars, mines shut down. Non-essentials, they shut down a lot of your big non-essentials. Maybe not all, or not all, but just enough to keep the war machine going, right? But men, women, and children are each individually affected by war. Men predominantly as combatants, women predominantly as civilians, have to not just deal with the loss of loved ones, but the loss of home and identity. What are they going to do? They have to survive, and the things women do to survive is not as they, they're not going to go hunting in the wilds, and that's why the government tries to round as many women as they can and put them on farms to try and stabilize society. But they disconnect, right? Women disconnect from their husbands, disconnect from their fathers, disconnect from their brothers, and often find themselves reverting back to childhood. women post-war often are unable to function uh, in a normal social circle. They only crave the company of women and try to protect children. And of course, children uh, lack discipline. Uh, the trauma of war impacts brain development. They form attachment issues and they cannot self regulate their emotions. And of course, they have abandonment issues. And these persist for generations. Now, general symptoms, uh, intrusive memories, reliving trauma, nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance. They stay away from people, particular places. They fail to engage in relationships, or when in relationships, they avoid deep, meaningful connections and commitments. Traumatized women tend to not have sex, tend to want more childish, protective relationships. So they go from avoidance to dependence. Hyperarousal, men are on edge, easily started, easily uh, aroused. Uh, and at the same time, they find it difficult to sleep, difficult to concentrate. And so their work performance uh, very high, instead of few highs, many lows. And of course, emotional numbing, stop caring about friends, family, self. Treatment and support, however, there are many organizations, but cognitive dissonance usually has people denying there's anything wrong. They're just trying to survive, trying to just that they're coping in their own way, and they just need time to heal. Well, you do need time to heal, but you also need someone who can give you coping mechanisms, ways to interact every day with your environment so that intrusive thoughts, you acknowledge them, process them, acknowledge, you say, right, I've had an intrusive thought. It's traumatic. It's over. I can. It's reminding me to never go back. Right. It's not only move forward, and instead of reliving the past, just say I've learnt my lesson. I can move on. I can move on. I can move on, and then don't dwell on having those thoughts. Just uh, try to allow, right, your, because your brain is cooked, right? It's got to cool. It's got to get rid of those excess chemicals. It's got to deprogram itself and restructure to reorganize. So you need discipline in your life. You need regular routines. If you're feeling any kind of emotional stress or disorders, yeah, well, if you cannot seek personal help, at least professional help. At least undergo some sort of uh, discipline in your life. Uh, Read up on post traumatic stress disorder. Try to interact with other men in meaningful ways that are non-violent, of course, and you will adjust over time. The whole point of therapy was to try and get you to give you tools to cope. Now, a lot of these are stuff you can find online, but of course, you know, if you don't believe in therapy, there's nothing I could say to convince you. But yes, the trauma of war predominantly hits each group differently. So each group thinks they're the victim, and the others, well, yes, those who lived through the war didn't have to be in combat to be a victim, right? Those who witnessed it, those who lost, right? Because women are going to get battle fatigue too. They're going to see the war on TV and get tired of it, right? They're going to be shell shocked by the noise, just as not as much as men, right? But they're still going to be a bother, right? They're still going to see traumatic things because as wars progress, they tend to get dark. The media tends to get darker to try and up the interest, right? As the media, as it loses audience through fatigue, it tries to up the ante. It's like a stripper. You know, first it's raise the hem, that's remove the shirt. You know, then you're not paying attention, so they jiggle their boobies, and then of course they proceed to remove their skirt, and eventually they have to go full Monty because it's the only way to hold your attention. And then even then, they're just like the nightclub manager walks through a room full of naked women, and the only thing he can think about is his how good his cigar is, and counting his money, because you just become numb, right? That's a psychological disorder, right? War does not allow you to take a break, and you can't avoid it. That's why after the war is over, you're going to see a lot of people who have combat stress who've never been into combat, because the war, and that's why I believe you see less of the Ukraine war than you did with the Gulf War, right? That's why a lot of people very carefully crafted, studied all the news outlets, studied the trends after the Vietnam War, and they concluded, that the propaganda, was a killer. Right? You're winning, and you talked yourself out of winning. That you thought the cost of winning was too high, so you didn't pay it, but it was there for the taking. You talked yourself out of it. And now, of course, governments are panicking because they don't want that to happen again. So they are jostling each other, to get them to back down. But ultimately, deep down, you've heard Keir Starmer claim that UK is going to have to go to war. That's ridiculous. They talk, Denmark talking about defending its territory. That's ridiculous. They are so immature. They're hyperbolic about the situations they're in, and the more hyperbolic and immature they act, it's deliberate, right? It's pushing to war. So it's going to take a lot of people, right? These videos, like me, mine, anti-war videos, right? You have to understand, right? If you can't sit through a video for more than 5 minutes, you are going to be propagandized, manipulated. If you can't control your emotions, then they're going to they will psychologically bombard, manipulate, and try to manufacture consent for war, because there are too many people watch war videos and don't watch anti-war videos, right? Now it depends, right? If there was a genuine threat, right, then yes, right? But we don't know, how much is bluff, right? Now Reagan called Russia's bluff. Look what happened. Panama didn't turn out so well. Noriega wouldn't stand down, and then spent days dragging the inevitable out. The same with Maduro, right? Biden wouldn't act. Maduro was ripe for the taking. And again, same with Iran. Could have killed Ayatollah, but at the last minute, he signed a deal. And this time, I don't think it's going to work. Same with Zelensky. I'm going to sign a deal. Okay, Russia backs off, and then he doesn't. So, yeah, this is the problem. Both sides. This time, you have Europe wanting the US to go to war for them again. And the majority of Americans are like, nope, we're not going to die for Ukraine. And now they're in a panic because they thought we'd manufacture consent, and it hasn't happened. They tried to like the US are pointing out, hey, you won't even defend your own borders. And so, you know, we may actually finally have a generation, right, who's not using war or anti-war as politics, but as basically the idea is, no, it does not effectively person me. I'm walking away, right? If they realize that side A or side B, right, you have people who are pro-war who won't fight the war, and you have people who are anti-war who won't protest the war. So you have a lot of young people out there, especially amongst Gen Alpha, who have no experience, but they know there's something wrong. They see, right, at least enough to know that it's not in their best interest when there's so many other issues going on, right? Well, if you're going to, well, why are we bother about Ukraine when there's all these problems, you know? And yeah, I can tell you that the government is trying to manipulate you in so many ways, everything, every day, trying to make themselves look important, sound needed, sound in control. And it's disgusting that more people don't call them out on their bullshit, but even worse, when they are called out on their bullshit, most people churn out within 5 minutes of a video, and the view counts matter to the trends. And when things don't trend, right, that's when the governments think they have you, right? So hopefully, right, you understand to deal with your emotions, and right, don't let the recruitment posters or the propaganda change your mind, right? Because that's when they control you. Once they start changing your mind through propaganda, they know, they'll work out, start to see the trends, and they'll move and keep using these trends to move you. You know, like they only have to move you 2 degrees. They don't have to move you far. They know how far they can push people, right? If you're adamant anti-war, they push you to the into the I don't give a fuck mode. You know, like you can be all the anti-war you want, but you don't get off your ass and do anything about it. That's what they do, right? Most of the time, that's all they care about, right? Either they manufacture consent or remove opposition. So thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel and support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. Whoopsies. Hold on. Sorry. Really appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.